Hello. Good morning to everybody. Good morning to the panelists. It's very good to see you, and I think that the crowdedness of the room is probably representative for the attention of this meeting, because we have no less than 900 people also watching us online. They are probably in slightly more comfortable circumstances than we are this morning. But I'm very happy to welcome you to the second DMA stakeholder workshop about today interoperability between messaging services. So as I said, this is the second workshop that we organize on one of the key aspects of the Digital Markets Act. You remember that we had our first workshop on self-preferencing, also under the DMA. So we know that for that workshop, also the majority of stakeholders really welcomed a possibility to discuss specific aspects of the DMA, now that we're entering a period of its implementation and its application. So for today, we've chosen to focus on Article 7 DMA, and more concretely on the interoperability between messaging services. As you know, this is a very hot topic that has been at the center of the debates and has also been featuring very prominently in the discussions between the co-legislators. So we have today received a lot of interest from many stakeholders, from organizations, interesting parties, and some of you have been working on concrete proposals on this topic for the past months. So we feel it is time to discuss the ideas openly and hear the various views on this topic. So as I said, we have around 900 participants. Good morning also to everybody online who registered, and we can indeed not accommodate everybody in the room. So this should not pose any limitation to anybody who wants to contribute or participate, because everybody will be able to ask questions and participate through Slido. So I hope you have downloaded it, and then you can use Slido. So very many thanks also to all the speakers who have accepted to join us in the panels. You see the first the panel next to me at the table. And here I would like to specifically mention Professor Simonetta Vezzoso in the middle, who kindly agreed to kick off our discussion this morning by sharing her thoughts. Now, maybe still a few, let's say, traffic rules for this morning. So our aim is to encourage further the dialogue between the Commission and all the stakeholders, and also between the stakeholders themselves. So we see today's event as an opportunity to discuss openly the ideas that can contribute to the implementation of Article 7. This is only the start of the dialogue, but it will be an important source of input for future reflections. Now, one personal reflection from me, I think this is probably likely to be the most technical workshop. So we will hear a lot of technical information. And I would hope that we all regard it as a common challenge to make the technical exchanges understandable for other people. So this is also because we, in the end, will be asked to explain why we decide one way or the other. But also, I think it will be, let's say, improving the usefulness of the sessions today if everybody makes an effort to make sure that not only the technology experts, but also the simple lawyers and economists can understand the debate. So we have structured today's panels into 3 sessions. The first panel is more general, about the legal framework of Article 7 and its trade-offs and its challenges. This is what we will kick off with. The second panel will definitely be more technical, because it will focus on end-to-end encryptions and security issues, which are, of course, key for the implementation. And then there will be a third panel that will discuss more other important issues, like the use of metadata, also the cross-identification of users, and the design of user-friendly interfaces. Now, what are what you could call the rules of engagement? There they are. So we, the Commission, will moderate the discussions. And you see my colleagues also behind the table. I will not mention them all, but I think for many they will already be familiar faces. So colleagues of mine will moderate the discussions. There will be 2 moderators for each panel, probably from DG Comp and from DG Connect, to focus both on in-person and online participants. So the Commission's role here is to steer the discussions. It is to hear the stakeholders' views, and this is why even if we're asked, the Commission will not take positions on the submissions and will not provide a legal interpretation. So we will also not prepare a final report or conclude on substance on the event. Now, each panel will start with short interventions from the panelists. The goal is, in the end, to have an open participation of the audience too. So after that, there will be opportunity for questions. So the questions can come from both the physical and the online participants. For the online participants, it will be through Slido. And the Slido link and the session number have been provided. So we always ask you to start with the name of your organization. And this is what I would also ask to the physical participants. Please, if you have a question, mention your name and mention who you are representing, also if it's yourself. So then, in order to keep the number of questions manageable, we will use the usual system for Slido, which is that everybody can use the like button. And this allows us then to identify what are the most, let's say, pertinent and relevant questions. So there will be a ranking, and it is good if you participate in giving the ranking. Now, obviously, given the number of participants, we may not be able to take all the comments and questions. However, the workshop is a first discussion. We already have many pre-designation meetings with stakeholders, with candidate gatekeepers, and there will be plenty of opportunity for more refined and more personal and more detailed discussions. So a last comment. Also, when you make comments, please do not share business-sensitive information. It's probably your natural inclination already, but good to remind you. And then also, today is a quasi-public session, and it will be recorded. This is what I'm also required to tell you before we start the discussions. So, this is all by way of introduction. I forgot to introduce my co-manager of the DMA, Alberto Baquiega, who's also here. And then we move over to Lea Zuber, who will monitor the first session. Over to you, Lea.
Thank you very much, Rita, and good morning to everyone. Thanks for coming. So, as Rita mentioned, we will start softly and slowly. The first panel will really focus on the structure and the main elements of the interoperability obligation, its gradual approach. We hope to touch upon the reference offer as well. So I'm Lea Zuber. I work on the DG Competition side of the DMA team, and I'm here also with my colleagues Alex Ruiz from DG Connect, we will do together the Q&A session. So we very much look forward to today's discussion. This panel is scheduled to last until noon, when a rather early lunch will be served. So let me just briefly introduce our panelists in the order of intervention. So first of all, we have, let's say, our introductionist, Professor Simonetta Vezzoso from the University of Trento, where she teaches competition policy and intellectual property rights. Then we have Ms. Chiara Caccinelli, who is the Deputy Head of the Economic Analysis and Digital Affairs Unit at ARCEP, so the French regulator for electronic communications. But she's also the co-chair of BEREC's working group on digital markets, so is here today representing the views of BEREC. Then we have Ms. Susanne Blom from the Federation of German Consumer Organization. Thanks a lot for coming. So Susanne covers in particular telecommunications law with a focus on consumer rights. And then finally, we have Mr. Jan Penfrat from the European Digital Rights Association, where he's leading the work on platform regulation, including the Digital Services and the Digital Markets Act. So thanks again, and I pass immediately the floor to Simonetta for around 15 minutes to give us a taste of the Article 7.
So thank you so much, Rita. Thank you so much, Lea. Thank you so much to the European Commission for the invitation. It's a huge pleasure to be here with you all. And I think it's also, I would really like also to thank the Commission for organizing this series of technical workshops, because it really shows, I think, the Commission intention to really create a sort of participatory implementation, which I think it's very good, and it should be really applauded. So as I will be your soft starter, so, but so the aim has already been recalled, so just setting the scene, the framework, but I will try to focus my intervention on, well, first of all, reminding us what we're talking about, Article 7, then discussing the objective, discussing the scope, which is very important, of course, and then I will have 7 points that I will consider perhaps possible issues in the implementation of this article. So I will highlight them, and then I will try to, as far as I can, to propose also solutions to solve those 7 implementation issues. Okay, so first of all, what are we talking about? Well, Article 7, as you know, appeared somewhat late in the day in terms of DMA negotiation. It was not in the original proposal by the Commission, which of course contained already quite amazing, I would say, provisions about vertical interoperability, considering, this at the device level, which is of course very important, something that we have been repeating BEREC has been repeating for a very long time. So the instance of choice, but somehow, so how come that this provision became part of the DMA? Well, as you know, it was basically the European Parliament that made quite a lot of pressure in the negotiations with good argument. And I must disclose here that I've been writing a study for a member of, for a group of the European Parliament, suggesting this, but of course many others with me. And so I had a little role as an expert in the negotiations. So what, in a nutshell, what is the Article 7 about? Well, Article 7 requires that the gatekeeper should ensure, free of charge and upon request, interoperability with certain basic functionalities of their number-independent personal communication services. Sorry, I will call them NICs from now on. As they provide these functionalities to their end users, and they should provide these functionalities to third-party providers. So there are 3 main elements. Well, only gatekeepers, okay? So it's not symmetrical interoperability, it's asymmetrical interoperability upon request. Okay, there is no obligation for small providers of messaging services to provide interoperability if they don't want it. And then the other thing which should be reminded, there are just only basic functions that are already basically applied by most messaging services. So it's very different from telecom interoperability, which is symmetrical, applies to everybody, and is most of the cases perhaps full interoperability. This is absolutely not the case. So what is the general objective of the obligation? Well, it is well known that messaging services at the moment are largely incompatible and siloed. The most important criterion is our choice as users of messaging services, surveys have shown, is whether people with whom we want to communicate are already using the same messaging service, so-called positive demand externalities or network effects. To a much more limited extent, our choice as users is based on the provider's competing features or, for instance, data protection policies, okay? So there are locking effects caused by network effects, and that affects the level of contestability in the market. Now, as a recital, that's part of the soft landing, recital 64 makes clear, because of the lack of interoperability, gatekeepers providing NICs benefit from strong network effects, and this contributes to the weakening of contestability. We can put it differently, as saying that in the absence of interoperability, network effects are firm-specific and proprietary. Instead, when different messaging services become interoperable, network effects are shared between competitors. However, it should be kept in mind that Article 7 does not aim to dissolve to the total dissolution of firm-specific network effects at all, as the gatekeepers will still have the possibility to differentiate themselves with not yet interoperable features, preserving their innovation incentives. Okay, so I want to ask at some point, one question could be, yes, but what about affecting multi-homing? Is it a problem because multi-homing equals contestability, and then it would be a bad idea? Well, to me, contestability is not just when we have multi-homing. Contestability means to have choices. Users have choices, that there are innovations coming not only for the walled gardens, as far as they can express themselves, but coming from the broader ecosystem. I mean, this is something that we should be able to assess. Of course, it's not possible perhaps to quantify it, okay? Just to say, it's much easier to say, well, there is less multi-homing that equals less contestability, which is not good. Not at all. There are things which are very important, but we cannot quantify, but they are not less important, like openness, choice, more potential innovation and things like that. Well, the other thing I would like to say, again, still with regard to objective, but I have no idea how many minutes I've left.
We are still fine.
Okay, good. I got many things to say. Is that this obligation, to my mind, shouldn't be seen isolated from the other ones. I think there are other important obligations in the DMA affecting the contestability of messaging services markets, like, for instance, the one about defaults, default application, pre-installed applications on the operating system or whatever. And I think that it should be really seen. So it really depends on how all those different obligations are made to work together. I think it's something that should be really reminded. And again, BEREC, directly, they have commissioned an independent report, and that's shown that there is quite a lot of consumer inertia. So as well, so this interoperability is not a silver bullet. Okay, so there are many other things in place why markets do not work properly. So the scope, I'm afraid I will have to go a little bit quicker than I expected, but in any case, well, first of all, it covers NICs. We mentioned them already, and interestingly, of course, NICs are not just messaging services. Another important services that are NICs are video conferencing. So there is a sort of inbuilt openness in this provision, which is quite interesting. Then the other thing, I could spend a little more time on that, but perhaps during the Q&As, there is a gradual approach in interoperability. So first of all, well, the first one, only message services. Then, as you know, there will be 6 months after the designation. There was the first phase of interoperability in terms of person-to-person messaging, and then the different attachments, and then group messaging, and then at the end, video calls, etc. So it's a very gradual approach. And then, of course, there is the possibility for the Commission, foreseen by the DMA, at some point to imagine that there could be a market investigation to identify the need to keep interoperability obligations up to date. And the Commission is empowered to adopt delegated acts to amend the DMA to regard to these basic functionalities, and they could add or remove functionalities. So this is part of the gradual approach. So what about the trade-offs? Well, the first one, briefly, is on the one side, the need to provide for effectiveness of interoperability. Okay, so effective interoperability. On the other side, the way I see it, the reality of the difficulty of creating interoperability by way of standard setting. Okay, so somehow there was that sort of trade-off. So on the one side, yes, you would love to have interoperability. If there are no standards, what do you do? And so they had to find a solution. And so the solution, solution is that, of course, it will be the gatekeeper that they will provide possibly public versions of application programming interfaces related functionality that are based on existing internal technical standards. So will be based on existing encryption technologies, protocols. They are used by gatekeepers, a much more demanding, taking into consideration the trade-off I was referring to, would have been for the Commission to mandate interoperability based on standards developed by industry upon mandate by the Commission. Okay, that would be much more demanding case. Second trade-off, and of course the coming, I don't need to spend too much time on that, so just to say that it's considered part of Article 7, the framework of Article 7, a trade-off between, on the one side, again, effective interoperability and security, integrity of the services. I think they will be discussed thoroughly later. Yeah? And then the third one, which is similar, but I think it would be nice to discuss it also from a different perspective. Again, interoperability between effectiveness of, the trade-off between effectiveness and interoperability and data protection. Okay, that would be a nice, it's a nice topic there. Okay, briefly to my the seven implementation issues I see and possible solution. Well, first of all, we can just predict what we can predict. So there can be market developments, technological developments we cannot foresee. So based on what we know, okay, these are the possible implementation issues I see. First of all, well, gatekeepers might be, let's say, dragging their feet, so not being very happy about opening their APIs and things like that. Well, first of all, that perhaps showing not the limited willingness to engage, I would say, would be just by refusing to engage with third parties. I think this is a nice occasion, okay, to prevent this issue from emerging, because we are here, okay, stakeholders, and there are stakeholders and gatekeepers in the same room, so there is an early engagement, okay. This problem is sort of taken care of. The second one is that, of course, there will be offers of interoperability offers to third parties which are not very enticing, okay, which are not ensuring effective interoperability. And then, in this case, of course, BEREC could have an important role in this respect, because there's foreseen a role for BEREC to look at the reference offers, how to structure them, and I think Carol might be talking about it. So definitely. The third channel, the third possible implementation issue, and there I see perhaps a little bit more complicated, is that we can spend a lot of time to try to make this solution work, okay, based on APIs. Okay, and we have seen it in we shouldn't mention competition policy here, we have different legal instruments, but we have seen it occur in competition policy in a couple of occasions that we try to implement a solution, but it doesn't work, and we don't think of changing it. We stay there, so path dependency. And so I think that, for instance, there is an openness in the DMA to think of different possibilities. This one does not work based on opening public APIs. And so Article 48, Recital 96, the DMA mentioned that interoperability obligation could be facilitated by the use of technical standards, and that where appropriate and necessary, the European Commission may request European standardization bodies to develop them. Fourth challenge is I think this is a pretty easy one. Of course, the Commission, it has already, but perhaps it needs to develop them. It's not part, I think, of the normal background of a national competition authority to have engineers, okay, with experience with the standard settings procedure. But, okay, so I think this is not that difficult. Then the fifth challenge, I think, is a little bit more difficult to solve. I don't have any concrete solution for that. And it's the fact that, yes, somehow this whole framework could work very well if other gatekeepers ask for interoperability to another gatekeeper, but it could be a little bit challenging for small and medium enterprises. So it would be too burdensome, could be not clear enough, it could be really... So I think the Commission should really look at that quite carefully, because it's really, I think it's an important part of the provisions, the fact that you really want to create openness coming from the garage or from corners of the internet where you wouldn't have looked for it. So I think this is an important point. Then 6, well, this is also manageable as an issue. Well, we all know there are huge asymmetry of resources between gatekeepers on the one side and regulators and civil society on the other side. And so I think that the European Commission should be leveraging all those resources available also from outside the Commission itself. And so, of course, involving national competition authorities, if they are willing to do that, I think it's very important. Second one, involvement of the high-level group. I think it's very important, not just once a year, but really have a continuous relationship with them. And then the other thing, and it will be the third one, perhaps an idea in the room, to create, well, civil society, of course, will have a continuing role in controlling the implementation, checking that everything runs as it should. But the other thing is that perhaps experts, I mean, like in the room or outside, could create a sort of DMA observatory, okay? So a grassroots initiative. We have already seen that such an initiative has been created by the University of Amsterdam for the DSA, and I think it is great. So it's a way also of leveraging resources from outside the Commission. Okay, and then the seventh, the last one, I don't say much about it, is about the user experience. Because I think it's very important, on the one side, that interoperability works in the background. Okay, we shouldn't be aware, like emails, we shouldn't be aware that interoperability works. But somehow, of course, consumers should be in control. There is the issue of data protection, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very important that at the end, there is a nice and good user experience, not confusing. Okay, there will be need for some education from the side of consumers, I think, but I think this is very, very, very important. But of course, the details will be discussed in the coming panels. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Simonetta. I think it was very comprehensive. I think you mentioned many of the issues that we've already discussed, and also it was interesting to hear your thoughts on the governance structure as well. Over to Chiara, and I guess this is a topic very, very familiar to BEREC, so the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So, the first time I repeated my speech, it was over 30 minutes, so we'll self-regulate and do it in half the time. So as you were saying, Lea, of course, interoperability and interconnection is something which is very well known in telecommunication markets, and it's one of the key tools that we use to open up markets. And so it is really something that we see as an important and crucial tool to foresee and enable market entry. So it is novel. Of course, it is for us, it was more like concerning physical networks. But what is also interesting is that in the European Electronic Communications Code, we already have interoperability measures for NICs as well. Still, these measures have not been applied yet, so the DMA will be the first time that these interoperability measures will be applied. So there is experience in the telco sectors that we can build on, but of course there is a variety of novel aspects that must be taken into account and for which there is still no experience. As I was mentioning, so the interoperability measures that we have in the EECC, so the European Electronic Communications Code, are different. It's under different conditions, for different objectives, and potentially concerning different operators and different actors. But of course, there is an interplay between the two. And as BEREC, we published a report, a draft report actually, in mid-December, which was open to public consultation. So we are now analyzing the responses. And the report was concerning interoperability for NICs under both regulatory frameworks and also how these two frameworks could work together. So today, of course, I will only focus on the part on the DMA. And what we did in the report is to analyze a bit what are the challenges and also proposing some solutions, knowing that, of course, there will be a building process and a learning process as well. So I will start for the DMA on the technical approaches which are possible, and then some challenges, and then some solutions. So the technical approaches, so Simonetta was also mentioning them, of course. In the DMA, the way interoperability is defined, there is, they say, so it is said, there is information which is exchanged via interfaces or other solutions. So it means that there is no specific technical solutions which is already set in the DMA. It is open to this decision of the European Commission. So what are the technical solutions? Of course, so the bad news is that there is no perfect solution. The good news is that it is the typical work of a regulator to do this balancing exercise between different solutions, the objectives, and the advantages of these and disadvantages of this solution. So this is a typical work. There is rarely like a perfect solution to a specific issue which is encountered. So the solutions is potentially, so the gatekeepers, so the provider, the NICs provider, can have some interfaces which can be developed and provided, and through application programming interfaces, so APIs. And in this case, it is quite, it is quite dynamic because changes can be implemented. So since it is the provider who is providing these interfaces, it can be changed. There can be innovation. It can be quite quick. But the problem there is that. Of course, since it is provided by the specific provider, it is provider-specific. So it means that there is no technical reason for having like the same set of APIs among different gatekeepers, which does not mean that it's not possible, but it depends on the incentives of the gatekeepers, it depends on the strategies and so on. So technically, there is no reason to choose the same. So it means that there can be a variety of different APIs provided by the gatekeepers. And potentially there may be as many APIs, a set of APIs, as there are the gatekeepers. So it means that for small providers, for small actors who would like to interoperate with the NICs of the gatekeeper, there can be lots of implementation efforts. So this is one point for the APIs, and then APIs can also be defined instead of being provided and defined by the gatekeeper. They can also be defined through standardization. And this is typically what was done in telecommunication sectors, where you have telephony and SMSs, which were developed by international standardization bodies and then applied by all the operators. The issue here, as I said, there's always advantages and disadvantages, is that it's a longer process. So there is an effort which is done beforehand to define the standards which are applied by the industry. And here, of course, it will also depend, probably the solution which will be chosen will also depend on a bit like the critical mass of the industry, who will be if they manage to agree around the common standards, of course, this could be the better solution. But if there is no common standards which is allowed, or the Commission chooses not to use, for instance, the article that Simonetta was mentioning about mandating the definition of a standard, then in that case, it would be more challenging. And for the different challenges that we were, so I don't have 7, I have only 3, but many of them were mentioned, so it will be shorter. So it's, first of all, it's the definition of, let's say, the scope of the application of these interoperability measures. The DMA simplifies, let's say, a bit this, because it's the functions which will be made interoperable, they are already defined in the text. There is a timeline for this, so it is a bit, this challenge is a bit easier, let's say, in the DMA, because it was integrated in the text. And then the 2 other challenges are, of course, typically ensuring innovation. So how to make sure that once you have the interoperable services, then there can still be some innovations. And there, of course, it depends on the solution, technical solution, which is chosen, either APIs and standardization. But there, again, it will depend on the technical solutions, but what is key for us as BEREC is that there is, whatever the solution there must be updating mechanisms which are foreseen already in the text, and how to treat new functions, for instance, so how it will be implemented, so it has to be fast in both cases, and also what has to be fast is also closing security gaps. So it has to be, everything has to be defined in the way this interoperability will be implemented. And then on data protection and security, so it's, of course, the second panel will go into details, so I will just stay a bit more at the high level. But for now, to our knowledge, at the moment, there is no common standard for the exchange of cryptographic keys or encryption, which is commonly implemented or supported by all providers. There are some encryption standards, like the Signal protocol, which is supported by different NICs providers, like WhatsApp, for instance, and also Signal. But they may implement it in different ways. So there again, there is a challenge for encryption. But for us, as BEREC, we do not see that interoperability is not possible, it's not compatible with end-to-end encryption. It just comes with additional complexity, which, so there are more challenges than it would be in non-interoperable environment, but it is not impossible. For instance, there are many different questions for the management of encryption keys. Where should it be stored? Because usually it is managed by the provider, by a trusted body, which is usually the provider of the NICs. But when it is interoperable, then there are different parties. And in that case, it could be still either the gatekeepers in any case, or it could be a centralized body which is doing like a third party. So there is all these kind of questions to ensure encryption and security, but it's still something that has to be integrated in the way that it is implemented, the interoperability is implemented, but it's not like impossible, or not incompatible, let's say. And then finally, so these are a bit the challenges. And one way forward that we see is that, and that will be key, is really the correct definition of the reference offer. And the correct definition doesn't only mean like the content of what will be in the reference offer, but also like the way it is defined and the way it is monitored and the way it is updated. And here, I think the telecom sector can really give like show like some of the experience to build on, because there is really like a long experience, and for this it's really quite close to what should be done in the DMA probably. And so for the reference offer, I don't know if everybody's familiar with this, but reference offer is actually it's a document where all the terms and conditions and the technical details of the interoperability, or the interconnections, or the access to the network are defined. Also, like in terms of commercial details, so everything is written in this reference offer, which is provided by what is called in the telecom sector the SMP operator, SMP operator, which is the gatekeeper of the DMA. And why it is there, this reference offer? Because it's for the obligations of transparency. Since there is an offer with all these technical details, what is offered by the SMP operator is transparent. It's there, it's written, it's publicly available. And then a second key point is non-discrimination, because since it is transparent and available for all access seekers, you cannot discriminate between one access seeker or the other, because information is available, and they will be they are offered the same kind of offer. And so this is really, really key. As BEREC, what we do in telecom, what we also did for the DMA, is to define a list of minimum criteria of what should be in the reference offer. So we'll not go into the details of the criteria here, because everything is in the report that we published in December. And we also received quite broad support by the respondents to the public consultation on the criteria that we identified. So some of them submitting additional criteria that we could consider, and that's what we are doing now. But it's a list of so all the technicalities which we think should be in the reference offer. But maybe what I can share about the experience of the telco sector is really like how we update this reference offer, because of course, as Simonetta was mentioning, there is an asymmetry of resources, but there is also an asymmetry of information. And this is totally normal. It's not, I mean, in all early regulated markets, it is normal that there is an asymmetry of information, and there is nothing wrong, but the only thing is that to integrate this asymmetry of information in the implementation process. So for instance, in this case, the first time the gatekeepers will publish a reference offer, there will be a variety of different details that make it potentially not work, or not work well, or not work for everybody, and so on. So what we did in telecom is that we adapt the reference offer regularly. And the information that we get to adapt this reference offer comes from the market players. It comes from the access seekers who tells us, okay, this is wrong, this is not possible to implement it in this way. So we get incredibly amount of relevant information from the market players, from the access seekers. So for this, what we do, for instance, in many countries, we organize some multi-stakeholders committees or fora where we discuss with the different market players, and where there is both what would be in the DMA, so in the gatekeepers and the access seekers, so the SMP operator. And what we do is that we discuss there, and we solve many minor issues are solved like this. They are solved in this kind of exchanges. They are regular exchanges, and we really think that this kind of regulatory dialogue will be absolutely key for the correct implementation of these kind of measures in the DMA. And people, when we were, so it's something like that we were proposing and pushing for also when during the discussion for the finalization, let's say, of the DMA. So after the first proposal by the European Commission, it's something that we really supported a lot as BEREC. And the people were often saying like, but it is too time consuming, it will take time, the discussion takes time. But actually, really, like these kind of exchanges with the market players are way, way, way less time-consuming than going through dispute resolution. So it's because some of the things can be solved. They are minor, so they can be solved easily. So for us, it's really like this kind of exchanges and this kind of framework, structured framework, where you can adapt the reference offer, especially at the beginning, but also later on as monitoring exercise, will be really like one of the key points for the success of the interoperability measures. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to see that the number of challenges is going down as we progress. But I think this was really very useful. I mean, for us, very much, going concretely in the reference offer, and to hear that there is already something that it's working quite well, as you say. So thanks a lot for that. Suzanne, the floor is yours.
Yeah, also thank you for the Commission for inviting me to speak on behalf of end users today and share a little bit about their experience in this whole thing. I'm going to touch on 3 topics today. One is sort of the end user perspective and end user behavior regarding interoperability, and how that can change the dynamics of the behavior of end users. Secondly, I want to talk a little bit about the benefits of the DMA, Article 7 in particular. And lastly, I also want to address some of the challenges as well. So for most end users, I mean, we are also end users, but for most of them, they only see, of course, the end result. So for us, it's important to make sure that the implementation of the obligation is done in the right way. So following the entry into force of the communications code, it was also briefly discussed already, and the ongoing legislative process of the DMA a couple of years ago, the possibility of interoperable messengers was heavily discussed in the public. So vis-a-vis asked itself, so sort of what is the consumer or the end user perspective? What are the expectations of end users with that regard? So we conducted a survey in 2021, and I'm going to share some of the findings today, not all of them. That would not be possible with the time. So firstly, as expected, WhatsApp was the most used messenger, with 87% of the respondents stating that they use it as their main messaging service. And when asked for the reason why they use it, they say that the most communication partners are reachable over via WhatsApp, with 78% of the respondents. So for each potential user, the usefulness of messaging services increases with the number of consumers who use this service. And Simonetta also briefly touched upon this. With our survey, we confirmed that network and login effects are decisive reasons why consumers choose specific messaging services up until now. When it comes to actual interoperability, it was interesting because a good third of respondents said that it's highly important for them to be able to exchange messages between different services in the future. And also a good third, 34%, said that they would switch their main service if interoperability would be possible. So we have to bear in mind that this, of course, it's just a prediction, so we don't know, but one can say in conclusion that we have over a third of user behavior that is now sort of locked in, and cannot choose the way they want to. So this brings me to the potential benefits of Article 7. And of course, one of the main benefits is hopefully the strengthened competition between different services, and also the reduction of market entry barriers for new services. And this all trickles down to end users having more choice, because currently end users' preferences of choosing a messenger are dominated by login and network effects. So what we would hope is that interoperability would allow end users to base their choice of messenger based on other functionalities, something like user friendliness, privacy, or data security. It can also create more like social connectivity and enable consumers to communicate to a wider range of people. But as we move towards implementing Article 7, there are some challenges, potential challenges and needs from an end user perspective. Just to give a broad idea, some were already mentioned. So from an end user's point of view, who, as I said, only sees the end product, confidentiality of communication and data protection are crucial. This was also one of our findings in the survey. And when it comes to interoperability, end users should give their explicit consent to connect to a different service, which also means that the consent must be informed with transparent information about what the service is offering, so that users can fully understand the implications of connecting to another service and potentially sharing their data. And of course, it must be also possible to easily revoke this consent if they no longer wish to connect to another service. We know that interoperability will require services to share specific data of end users. And we also briefly touched on this already. The DMA has sort of a built-in protection function, hopefully, when it says that only strictly necessary data must be used. But of course, the question is which data is necessary and who defines that, and I'm sure we touch on that later in the other panels. Another topic which is important from an end-user perspective is end-to-end encryption, and also the standard of protection we have now, which should not be lowered here. From an end-user point of view, the gatekeeper's behavior in implementing the obligation of interoperability is not foreseeable. So we have to make sure now that the vulnerability is touched upon and kept in mind. So data protection levels should not be undermined with this regard. Another important point are identifiers, which one should be used. And from an end user's point of view, this should not, of course, be the telephone number, name, email address, but more so that the user can freely decide which identifier or ID they want to use, maybe within like a defined scheme. So in conclusion, it is a complex topic to discuss about, especially with regard to the technical standards, and we do welcome that the Commission works closely with BEREC, and that BEREC already provided some information on that, and will work together in the future to secure data protection and privacy for users. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Suzanne, and it was also very useful to to hear the insights from the end user perspective. Jan, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And also thanks for having me. For ADRI, it's the same thing. We're looking at this from a people's perspective, mostly. Most people here will probably know that the digital rights community has been largely and strongly in favor of interoperability obligations in the DMA. For us, it is the Article 7 is much more than just a competition tool. For us, it's a small, but it is still a step. It's a small step, but it is still a step towards more openness in the internet. In a way, it's a step back to where we once were, but I hope it can even be better than the place we were at. And so it's more than just a competition tool. It's really kind of bringing us back to where our basic tools like DNS, TCP/IP, thank you, all the web standards have put us in the first place, and something that we've lost. So generally a really positive thing. But Article 7 does have a couple of shortcomings, of course, and some of them were already discussed here. But we think it's possible to make it work, provided that either the gatekeepers cooperate in good faith, which may or may not happen, or the Commission enforces this obligation reliably. It's already been said, I think, Chiara, you pointed this out, building secure interoperable messaging services is probably harder than building closed and centralized silos, and I'm pretty sure that our friends from Matrix who are in the room can tell you more about that. But it's definitely possible, and I think it's absolutely worthwhile. And there is already a lot of work that has been done, so we don't even have to start from scratch. There are already things like the Matrix protocol, which does exactly that. There's already things like the messaging layer security protocol, MLS, which has been standardized at IETF level for a while now. It's not going as fast as I would love it to go, but this work is being done, and it's really, really useful. So we can build on that. We don't have to, Meta and Apple don't have to start from scratch. And those examples also have shown that this work can lead to beautiful results that are commercially successful and innovative. And I think that's also really important, given that this is the context of the DMA that is supposed to increase competition and thereby innovation on the EU market. And just to say, these examples include all of the functionality that the DMA kind of says, oh, it's so hard, we have to wait another 4 years for this to get done. So this includes group calls, video calls, all of this, even stickers, right? So really, really important. And then there are other examples that I think are worthwhile mentioning, where I believe that these existing technologies will more likely go through the roof and be popular when Article 7 is properly implemented. There are multi-protocol chat apps like Beeper, and I think so they're also in the room. That's really fantastic. And Beeper empowers people to message to with various messaging apps at the same time out of one app with one click basically. It's also built on Matrix technology, on top of Matrix technology, and it shows how interoperable protocols can spark this type of innovation. And I think this is really what the DMA is for, right? But at the moment, the way it is, like without Article 7, people have to go through tedious hoops to kind of bridge all those services together manually, and that's obviously a lot of work. It's incredibly inefficient as compared to doing this based on a common open standard, of course. So breaking up those silos is really really hard at the moment, and because of restrictions that exist, that are enforced by gatekeepers for commercial reasons, the situation we have right now, despite all those positive examples, is far away from what we could achieve with Article 7 in real interoperability. And the reason it is so hard is because gatekeepers do not currently cooperate on this. So they block this both on a technical level, but also on a legal level, threatening to sue everyone who might want to connect to their services. And that's obviously a big problem. So the single biggest threat and challenge in a successful Article 7 is not the lack of how do we make encryption work or a common identifier, or will Meta or Apple be unable to develop their APIs quickly enough? I think they are. It's really their behavior, the gatekeeper behavior, and a subtle undermining of the functionality of interoperability can already be enough to make the whole thing just be useless, if I may say so. But we haven't, this is not the first time that we're doing this, and I think this is important for also the Commission work on enforcement afterwards. In 2015, we've seen similar problems in the banking sector where the Payment Services Directive 2 obliges incumbent banks, kind of the gatekeepers to our bank accounts, to interoperate with other fintech apps. Now, back then, the banking industry has fought this obligation in the PSD2, tooth and nail, using many of the same arguments that gatekeepers use today in the messaging space. They said data security, oh, it's technically too difficult, etc., etc. And that despite the fact that already back then we had open banking standards on the market, like FinTS, which were working pretty well. And they were still using those arguments. So it took many complaints from the fintech competitors before the APIs that the banks were eventually obliged to offer started to be useful, and people could enjoy the kind of modern innovations like third-party payment providers or multi-banking apps. Now today, and I think that's also a very important learning exercise for the Article 7 enforcement that lies ahead, the standardization process for the banking apps is managed by the Berlin Group, which is an industry-run private body that defines a common API standard which creates uniform and interoperable communications and so on and so on between the banks and the third-party fintech apps. Now, I'm not part of the Berlin Group, so I can't tell you any specifics from inside the group, but I can tell you as an industry-run group, it is not particularly open to the garage type of innovation that we've been talking about before. So if you're a one-person free and open source software app developer and you want to say, oh, cool, I want to, connect with my bank, it's going to still be a challenge, I believe. So if Article 7 wants to be non-discriminatory and pro-innovation, we need to make this very, very low-level entry so that small apps and new innovators can come into that as well. So for me, what does all this tell us about Article 7 enforcement? It's I believe gatekeepers are going to resist one way or another, openly or very, very subtly. Gatekeepers will try to offer subpar APIs. That's just what I expect. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I will be. It will be the task of the competitors to be very, very vocal and public about it if that happens, because they're the first one who will realize that. And the users, obviously, because for the users, it will just look like, oh, this competitor doesn't work very well. I'm going to go back to WhatsApp, right? So it's not up to users to be able to say what is going wrong in that chain. It's for the developers who must come forward, and hopefully for the Commission to listen to them. And ideally, under Article 7, we should move the development of APIs, or even better, open standards, outside of an industry body and into the open to allow permissionless innovation the way I described it already. And one way of doing that would be moving this into existing or new, but I guess existing is easier, existing open multi-stakeholder standardization bodies that develop and maintain open communication standards, either new or build on something that we already have, which I suspect will be much easier. And that the kind of end-to-end encrypted instant messaging that we're all used to in centralized silos becomes a staple function across different services. And that would help us avoid the many pitfalls that the open banking example has suffered from, and save us a lot of the pain for both the developers and the Commission as the enforcers, but also pain to the users. If you want to look up more about these standardization bodies, one of the ADRI members, Article 19, has just published an online almanac on international standardization bodies. You find it at almanac.article19.org. It's super informative and gives you a great overview of what's already out there. Of course, none of this is prescribed in Article 7, unfortunately. ADRI and many other civil society organizations have fought hard to make this stronger, but we have to work with what's there now. And so, should the gatekeeper-controlled API model fail, which it might, we would encourage the Commission to not shy away from use all the tools at their disposal, including the anti-circumvention clause in the DMA, to enforce this thing in the most robust way. Maybe the DSA needs amending quickly. We'll see if this really goes sideways. But I think through the anti-circumvention clause, I think this can already help us achieve the messenger interoperability that we need in the EU. I just brought 2 or 3 slides to show how this could look like in practice, because Susanne, you have mentioned how this, how this would look like from a user perspective. And I've stolen those slides. I've borrowed those slides kindly from one of our members, the Electronic Frontier Foundation in the US, and they have kind of just build some mock-ups how this could look like. And originally those were made for social media services, but I think they work very well for messaging services as well. So if someone wants to leave a gatekeeper service, let's say, WhatsApp, for example, they could connect their accounts, or they would need to connect their accounts first. So they create a new account on a new server, could be running their own server if they wanted to, or some offer that they found more enticing than the gatekeeper. And then they could connect those, which would give them a pop-up, which basically says we've had a request link, oh, I should have removed Facebook there, sorry, to your identity, to an account named this one on, another service called User Republic. Is this you? Click yes if yes, otherwise report the suspicious activity. So this is kind of the first trust relationship you will build between the new account and the old one that you had before. Once that relationship is established, you can exchange data back and forth safely, like exporting all of your contact list or your messaging history, right? Which is really important if you move from one service to another. Now, if you want to start chatting with someone on a different service, right, they could get something like this on their gatekeeper service, a contact update, which is like, hey, your friend Trisha Thomas has just moved to a new network. Are you okay continuing to message her? Is that fine for you? They may have different rules on their server than you're used to. You can click here to find out what those rules are. If you're okay, click OK. If not, you can say no. Okay? And then your friend would learn about this. And this is a super important step as well, because this is the kind of user information that we want, right? We don't want people to just stumble into this and then reduce their level of protection because they have been on a more protective service before, and now all of a sudden they're connected to a less protective service. So they should know about it and be able to choose. And then obviously, if you have 1,000 contacts in your app, then this can be really annoying. So we should also create preferences for them to do this in bulk if they want to. So like, when a friend moves to a new service, ask me every time, block all of the requests. I do not want to know about interoperability at all. Or you can only accept requests from certain other services that you already trust. So if someone comes, from Signal and wants to connect with you, I say, oh, Signal, I know they're good. I want to accept all requests from Signal people, but I hate Telegram. I don't want to have anything to do with Telegram people. So this should be included in the thing. And building these things in a usable, user-friendly way will be the responsibility of the gatekeepers. And knowing what the commercial incentives are, I don't know how likely it is that they're going to build it that way. So it will be the enforcer's task to look after that this is actually going to work well. So those are just mock-ups. They're examples. They're not perfect, right? They can be better than that. But just to show in which direction we believe this should be going. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jan. And thanks very much for this very concrete presentation and for showing us also these examples. We have now about an hour left. I wanted to ask first if some of the panelists wanted to take the floor again, maybe to react to what has been said in the other presentations. Otherwise, we open the floor to questions. If you could just introduce yourselves. No questions in the room? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Ralf Meijer from the XMPP Standards Foundation. XMPP has been around for almost 25 years now, standardized at the IETF and managed through the XMPP Standards Foundation. I fully support your suggestion to have a common standard that is already existing, and I do have a question based also on your examples. One of the slides that you showed was basically asking for confirmation whether an identity at a certain network was also going to be connected to an identity in another network. So my question to you is, how do you see interoperability? Is it I will have identifiers in different networks that represent me in those networks, and I need to use those to communicate with people local? Or are you thinking more of a true federation type of setup like in email?
thank you so much for the question, and apologies that I didn't mention XMPP. It should absolutely have been on my list of examples of already existing technology that's been around for a long time and can serve obviously as a basis for that work. On your question, in an ideal world, we would absolutely want to see a real federated system with shared identifiers, so you don't have to open individual accounts on each service. That we kind of already have. That's what Beeper is doing at the moment, if I'm well informed, right? So you can already kind of open accounts everywhere and kind of combine them in an app if you want to in a tedious way. Or I don't want to, but it's harder than it should be. No, I think if apps can agree on a common identifier, I agree, telephone number is not ideal. What would be the easiest way, but there are better ways than that. Then yes, that would be much better for people.
Okay, thank you. Maybe an online one?
Yeah. Yes, so we have several questions. Maybe one that I would say is addressed to Chiara from BEREC, which is telcos have been mentioned a couple of times as a role. So what role do you exactly see for them? And if you foresee some interoperability with also messaging services with telcos?
So sorry, I missed the beginning of the question. So if there is interoperability with other different type of telecom services. Okay. So actually the way, yes, as it was mentioned also by Simonetta at the beginning, so the way the DMA is phrased is it's concerning NICs. So NICs, it's not just messaging services, it's different type of services, so mainly three types. You have messaging services, video conferencing services, and email services. So for email services, technical interoperability is already in place, so it's already working. We have seen, but it's something that we will probably analyze a bit more in the future, that technical interoperability for email services, as I said, is there. Sometimes it's not always working well 100%, but it's something that we will focus on in the future. So focusing on the other two services where interoperability is not yet in place, so messaging services and video conferencing services. As I was saying, there is a challenge for the scope, the definition of the scope, and on which services, on which functionalities interoperability will be implemented. So the choice which was made in the DMA is to focus on functionalities. So to say at the beginning we will focus on text messages and sharing of documents, images, and so on. And then afterwards it will be, at the beginning it will be for individual users, then it will be for groups, and then at the end it will be also for video calls and voice calls. But actually, you can take also another point of view. So it's not only on functionalities, but it can also concern services. Because when we look at the functionalities, for instance, text messages, this is also a functionality which is in video conferencing services. So it could be another point of view. It really depends on the definition of the scope of the interoperability measures. And another way could have been also to say, okay, we focus on functionalities, but it is across different services. So potentially, if you are on a messaging service, then you could also be made it interoperable with a video conference service only for the function of text messages. So there are different ways that interoperability can be designed. The choice of the DMA and also the legislative discussion at the beginning was mainly on the messaging services, and it's what now the DMA is mainly focusing on for the first steps. But as BEREC, and as BEREC we did a bit the same. For the draft report, we are now focusing on messaging services. But in the future, let's say, it can also, it can be broadened, the scope, and it can also be like on different kind of services which are still NICs and which offer functionalities which can be similar. So as I said, it could be thought like the interoperability also thought not only intra-NICs but also inter-NICs, so different NICs offering functionalities which would be made interoperable. So I hope it's answering the question.
I would just like to add something. I think the example of video conference is quite interesting because we have seen there already interoperability between Microsoft and Zoom. So it also shows that when there is there is a sort of symmetry of power, it's not that difficult to get into interoperability. Okay, so it's I think it's nice, food for thought.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely, it's really a key example where it could also be studied a bit all the technical difficulties about the video calls and voice calls that is always put forward. When there, it could be seen actually, so how did they do in practice? Also, it's interesting to see what are the incentives behind for doing this. Of course, it's a bit, when it is between two big players, the incentives may be different if it was like a big player and a small player, of course. But it's quite interesting that it was done on a voluntary basis. So probably exchanging also with these actors would be quite, could be some food for thought also for an implementation of the measure in other types of functionalities or other types of NICs.
Okay, thank you. Okay. The gentleman in the back.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm Simon Phipps. I'm from the Open Source Initiative. A lot of the people that we represent run their own servers of one kind or another for engaging in messaging. And it isn't clear to me the degree to which the use of the term user embraces the understanding that citizens may well be running servers that are engaging in messaging. So, for example, I run a messaging server at home for my family to use. And I would like to have it interoperate with many services so they don't have to have accounts on every service that exists. I wonder if the panelists are able to reflect on the degree to which the provisions that we're considering today address the need for citizens to be messaging platforms rather than merely account holders.
Well, tentative. Well, it should be somebody requesting the interoperability to offer services. So what about, I don't know, I have no idea about the citizen services, whether they are open to others to join them, or if it's just for the family. I don't know. I think it would depend on that definition.
Yeah, maybe I can add something. I think this you're pointing to one of the weaknesses of the DMA, that the DMA was built as an industry law that that regulates the relationship between gatekeepers and other companies who want to be on the market and are facing the gatekeeper kind of competition limitations. And users have just been added kind of as an, no offense to obviously the drafters and everything, but they play a smaller role in the DMA. And now in Article 7, if I'm not mistaken, there is no limitation as to how big a player needs to be in order to enjoy or in order to be able to ask a gatekeeper to interoperate. But obviously, the process of getting there has been built for companies to do and not for private individuals. And that's a weakness, I think. So again, if in the enforcement process there is any way for the Commission to make this process as easy as possible and as low barrier to entry as possible, then more people can actually use this. And that will be beneficial for the kind of citizen-run, community-run services that we require in Europe to achieve the digital sovereignty goals that the Commission has set themselves.
Yeah, Ralph Meyer again. I wanted to add to Mr. Phillips here. I'm not sure which implementation he used. There are several. I think Matrix supplies that. There is a thing called Snicket, which is basically a branded version of XMPP that people can run on their own, but it's very easy to install. One of the advantages here also is that you can be in control of your own messaging archive. Messaging archives have their own way of storing your information at the server, but you still have it under your own control, not by a third party. Some of the challenges there are, for example, end-to-end encryption. Most of the end-to-end encryption technologies that have been proposed or have been implemented rely on the end-to-end encryption to actually end at the device and not at, for example, a home server. I have not seen a lot of consideration for this aspect yet. And I think it is important to also understand that there are many organizations that would like to connect in this way that have regulatory requirements to not have end-to-end encryption with the same kind of problems. they would like to have a messaging archive, or they want to be able to see what their employees, for example, send, or they have to keep all that information for all kinds of purposes. I think it is important that we include that aspect, so the optionality of end-to-end encryption, or maybe even to define the end encryption to not be entirely end-to-end into the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think we will discuss this further in the afternoon, but we go now to an online question on reference offers, just to take a step back.
Yeah, we have another question, and this is on reference offers. I suppose this is back to Chiara again. So essentially the question is how to check that the gatekeeper in the reference offer is not giving a suboptimal option.
Yes, so it's as I was saying. So the first reference offer, of course, there is an asymmetry of information. So there are some information which are just not known by the regulators, or in this case by the European Commission, and is not known by other market players either. So it's really a learning process. So the first, if we look at the telecom sector, also the very first laws with which were creating the regulatory framework in telecoms, they were way far from what we know now. It's really like at the beginning you have some rules, and you check if it works, and you have to adapt regulations. So there is, I mean, maybe there is sometimes there may be a bit an idealistic impression of how this kind of legislation and regulation works, but it's really like at the beginning it's really a learning process, and it's normal, and it has to be like for the regulators, it has to be like open to what comes from the market players. So at the beginning, yes, maybe the gatekeepers will give some optimal information on what can be implemented, but with time it will be people will learn, and access seekers, they will see that there are other functions which may be accessed or used, and done it in a better way, in a technical, the technical implementation can be improved. But this is, again, it's really learning process. There is no way to know upfront what is the best solution, because it's just the gatekeeper which holds this kind of information. So. And that's why it is important then to create this kind of learning mechanism, and taking this information from the access seekers.
I mean, we will challenge for all of the obligations, but yeah, please go ahead.
Just something adding to what Chiara was saying. Oh, sorry, adding to what Chiara was saying. I think it's very important if the reference offer also provides for a dispute resolution mechanism. I mean, I think that would be very helpful. I don't know how. I mean, I don't know how you do it, but I mean, I think that would be very helpful.
And maybe just to react on this, so we did in the criteria that we listed as BEREC, there is also the how the dispute would be solved. So it is also in the reference offer. In the telecom sector, we have a dispute resolution mechanism, which is really like very specific and very structured, which is something which is not in the DMA as it stands now. But it's of course it's really the key point to solve this kind of issues. But again, the committees with multi-stakeholders is a way to solve issues without going to dispute resolution in a much faster way.
Okay, maybe we take someone who wants to follow up on the reference offer. I see many hands, but if someone has a reference offer, no, then maybe the gentleman here was first.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Peleg from Viber. So my question is around what Jan and Suzanne described about user consent, basically. So, if I understood correctly, that means that, for example, a user on WhatsApp will have to give a consent to be discoverable around different services, which might limit the effect of this interoperability to other services that are seeking to get this interoperability. So, do you think that, of course, we need to give the user the option to give the consent and to be discoverable by other services, but do you feel that this actually limits the power of Article 7 and DMA?
Well, I wouldn't say it limits the power, but it's just a part of the consumer's choice to have. Also, we must keep in mind, and this like kind of goes along with the reference of that for the user, like the user experience, they don't know like all the stuff we talk about. So when the gatekeeper gives the reference of with all the technical standards and the design, and then we come to a point where we have interoperability, such points like the consent are very important, because in the beginning it won't be perfect. And some users will not use it, will not use the interoperability option because they chose a specific messenger that is high in data protection and they value their data in a different way. So points like that, like the consent, are very crucial to help end users make an informed choice. Also to say, I don't want that anymore, to be able to revoke that easily. And this can help in the beginning to sort of transition and not shy users away from it, because we do want good protection, and we want users that value data protection very high to be able to also enjoy interoperability. So those concepts play a big role in that, in my opinion.
I agree, and on top of that, and so this is what I'm going to say is not official ADRI position, but I assume. So I'm not sure that we actually need to acquire consent for discoverability as a first step, and I say this with a lot of care, because already today, if you want to know if someone is on WhatsApp, you just download WhatsApp, you type in his phone number, the identifier, and WhatsApp will tell you, right? Same with Signal. Signal will just tell you. But then the consent comes in when you start chatting. So before someone, before you can enter a chat with someone, that person needs to say, yeah, I accept that connection. So that is already there. And so the only thing we would need to add is an additional piece of information that says that other person that is just about to connect with you is not actually a Signal user or a WhatsApp user, but comes from a different app. Is that okay for you? I have the feeling that the discoverability thing isn't that much of a problem, because currently this is already happening, right? I mean, if I send an email to someone and that person has an email account there, I already have the address, so it's kind of a hint that that person is probably there. And if the email arrives and there's no error message, then it's likely that I discovered that the person has that email address. If that person doesn't have the email address, I get an error message back. This email address doesn't exist. Discoverability, right? It's already there. No consent needed. So it seems to be already kind of the default where everybody is set on in terms of user expectations. Now, I'm not saying this is the perfect kind of world. Maybe there is a way to build this differently. But I'm much less worried about discoverability than I am about the possibility to spam people across networks without their consent. So this would be the more important point for me to ask for consent.
Thanks a lot. I think I had missed someone at the very end. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Gerben from NLNet. We fund lots of open source interoperable solutions. I just wanted to add in on the consent question, because I think we do have to take a lot of care who's going to formulate and make the user interfaces for this. Because as Jan Penfraat noted, the gatekeepers often don't have an incentive to make it easy for people to interoperate. They'd rather make it scary for people, like, oh, there's somebody from a server that you shouldn't trust, because it's this thing that somebody self-hosts in their own home, so you don't know what they're going to do with your data. And I think it really has to be taken into account here that the parties that are most popular now, so you say it's a bit of a transition scheme, but the most popular gatekeepers now are companies, well, I'm not going to name names, but they usually don't respect your data the best. So often the DMA, the interoperability, is a way for people to get to places that have better data protection, and they get away from the places that have the worst data protection. So I think having those parties warn you, like, oh, you might lose data protection possibilities, whereas they are worst on the track records of data protection, it seems like we may be asking the wrong question here. So I'll keep it at that.
Yeah, we have now a question online which more or less relates to the debate now. So essentially, it's, people usually dislike pop-ups. So how can you extract that balance when it comes to warning users without upsetting them? Anyone can take it if you want.
Yeah, maybe I can just add a few words about pop-ups. It's coming from the telecommunication sector. It's really a huge problem. We have lots of complaints, so this is a good question and something to keep in mind. But I mean, I'm not a technical expert, but I would guess it's easy to not make it as a threatening pop-up if you wish to. So then we again come into the gatekeeper's behavior. But I agree, this is something also with spam topics we need to discuss. And I think later in the day we will touch upon those again.
Just remind you that we have an anti-circumvention provision that should be enforced.
Okay, I think we can. Yeah, go.
Maybe just one point, because it's when I was mentioning email services before, that they are already interoperable. But what we saw also when we were discussing with different stakeholders in the past, so during the discussion of the DMA, what we saw is that sometimes you have services are interoperable, so it is absolutely technically possible to switch from one service to the other. But then in those cases, there are some strategies which are put in place by the big platforms, saying like when you are changing, for instance, your email services, they tell you, are you really sure? Do you really want to watch out? And so on. So there are all these different strategies which can actually make users less convinced, let's say, about the choice of switching. But it's even when once interoperability is there, it doesn't mean that it will be like necessarily like easy to switch, and for users that it will be clear what are the implications, the real implications. Because sometimes there are, of course, strategies which are not technical and not interoperability related, but maybe strategies like how the interoperability, the process is presented by the platform. So of course, there it's let's say an extra step to take in order to make sure that it really works in practice, especially for the users to understand what really implies.
Okay, one more question from the room, please.
So Rowan May from Wire. This is in reaction to the question about how you make this not scary. Most of the, if you look at a sort of a graph of when people get connection requests, most of them occur after they have just met someone, either in person or they've had some other significant interaction with them online. And that is a perfect time to reassure that person, I'm going to send you a connection request, and this is what it's going to look like. So I think that the gatekeepers can try to make it scary if they want to or not, but that the users are going to win this battle.
Question goes for the last 10-15 minutes, I think discussion was having a number of points that were asked, and I think answer is reputation. And have you been thinking about reputation model? Now we have a chance to make it way better than with the telecoms, because in telecoms also I've been involved in standardization at ITU and ETSI, and we haven't done a great work because there is still a lots of scam, there is still a lots of fraud in telecoms despite long history, similar with email. So I think now we have a chance to get it right. And I'm curious if you already have some thoughts there and if you can share it.
Someone wants to react? I can only just say that, of course, we want to get it right. That goes without saying. But maybe we... Yes, go.
as you said, we can learn from past experience. I mean, just not to do the same mistakes. And I think that's why perhaps we need really competence in the Commission, also for engineers who have been working in those committees and seen what the possible pitfalls are. Even if the perfect standard, I mean, it can become proprietary because of the different ways it can go. So, I mean, there are so many ways that it can go wrong.
But maybe to quickly add, this is not prescribed in Article 7 DMA, right? So I think this is another really good argument for the enforcer to say the enforcer needs to go above and beyond the mere prescriptions of the article to make sure that this is working well in the end.
Yes, so another question online, I think this also goes for for all panelists. It's about the encryption protocols, and essentially different messaging services providers, they use different encryption protocols to differentiate themselves as well from each other. So it's not your fear that Article 7 and the interoperability is going to also, kill that differentiation.
Well, based on Article 7 itself, it can't. Because the level of interoperability, the end-to-end encryption, which is offered to the users already, should be offered for interoperability. Otherwise, you cannot do it. So there is an important way there that, I mean, you have to offer the same level of end-to-end encryption if you want to do it.
Thank you. Pınar Serdengeçli from ECTA. When there was the intervention from Mrs. Chiara Caccinelli, she correctly touched upon a very important point, which is the non-discrimination. And then we also had some questions regarding the risk of the end-to-end encryption and the usage of the models by the gatekeepers, and how this would relate to the models that were used then by the challenging parties. And on this one, my question is about the paradigm of non-discrimination that will be used also probably in the reference offers, because when you are giving and providing different elements regarding the interoperability, of course you also have to choose what is the quality and what is the characteristics of the elements that you are providing to the challengers. And from our experience in the telecommunications industry, what is really working is to give exactly the same product to the internal divisions of the gatekeeper with respect to the challengers, because otherwise it will always be an issue of deteriorated quality. This will be given to the challenging operators that will have really difficulties in entering. So what is your opinion on that and how you will be dealing with it? I'm referring, of course, to the equivalence of inputs versus equivalence of outcome. Thank you.
So this is something that, as BEREC, we haven't explored in detail. So I have no position as BEREC to reflect on. But I think it's indeed a key point, because of course, if it is a different level of quality which is offered to the access seekers compared to the gatekeepers, then of course it wouldn't reach the objective which is given in the DMA, which is market contestability, because of course you would always have a different offer which is proposed by the different providers. So, but yeah, I will have to stay on this high level, because it's something that we will rather work on and analyze as BEREC in the next future.
Sorry, just 1 second. I think someone was in this row. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I'm Colline Dambourg from Orange, and I also have a question for Ms. Caccinelli, which is over the course of preparing indeed your draft report, the BEREC draft report on the interoperability of NICs, have you or has BEREC ever come across the question of interoperability for RCS messaging services, interoperability with core platform services such as Apple Messages, or would it be something that you could see yourself investigating further in the future? Thanks.
Yes, thanks a lot for the question. So during the drafting of the report, we meet also with experts. There are also some experts in the room that we have met in workshops also to learn more. And indeed, the experience of RCS was something that we organized a workshop on, an internal workshop, to learn more and see how it worked for the experience that they had for this. It is not something that is still reflected in the draft report, but we got also some feedback during the public consultation. So it may be something that we touch upon a bit in the report, knowing that of course there is on this there is a big experience which is out there, so in the industry on the process. So it's something that it can be presented rather by the involved parties to give really a feedback on how it worked and what were the challenges. But it will be probably something that we'll try to touch upon before the publication of the final report.
Hello, I'm Michael Raymond from Process One, and I wanted to follow up on your question about open source implementation, people running their own server. We build we are a company that build open source implementation of open standard like XMPP and Matrix and so on. And I wanted to make sure that you are taking into account in the company, in the party involved, that there is not only company running instant messaging services, but also provider of component, open source component or not, of messaging tools.
Thanks a lot for this remark. I don't know if someone wants to...
No, just to say that we do not analyze in details all the options which are there, but for instance, we were mentioning also in the report that there are common standards which are already there, like Matrix, but also XMPP. So it's something that we do mention in the report as well. So we are, of course, aware of this, and but yeah, for sure.
My name is Eric Mijukovsky. I'm representing Beeper. We are we built a universal chat app that lets you chat with people on 15 different chat networks. My question is around the implications for non-European users. We have many users of our system who are based in Europe, but many who are not. I'd love to learn a little bit more about how what are the implications of the DMA with respect to international users and international companies. Not the gatekeepers, I think I understand pretty well how they fall under the DMA. But in particular, how will interoperability work in practice with users who are not in Europe? If anyone has any insights.
Well, I think we have to look at the objective of the DMA, which is, of course, is not limited geographically. I mean, it's, I think the remit would be global, in the sense that it will definitely have an effect on users communicating with users being not in the EU. I mean, that's for sure. I mean, it's I see it as a global in that perspective. But I don't know if I understood your question correctly.
I think I was interested in kind of how the enforcement would work. I think I understand a little bit about how business users can perceive, applying for enforcement against gatekeepers, but I'm struggling to see how users might be able to perceive that.
Yeah. Maybe I can, and just to clarify, I mean, we will be enforcing the DMA within the EU. Now, whether the gatekeepers who will be under this obligation, if they provide these compliance solutions, whether they want to go outside the borders of the EU to offer this product to others, that we cannot predict. But
I find this question really interesting because we have sort of the same debate on that when it comes to roaming. So we have roaming in the EU, which is awesome for users, but then every now and then the question pops up, but what do we do internationally? And the European Union is kind of, I mean, a little bit pushing for it, but it's really hard outside its own entity to enforce something like that. So you would have to have agreements when you look at roaming, let's say, with Australia or with the United States to make like a global enforcement. But to be honest, I don't see, or you have to have the gatekeepers do it on their own, which I don't see. So for now, it will probably be something that people in the European Union can use. Maybe if the pressures are high enough, gatekeepers will change their behavior. But I mean, one can only hope.
I just want to add to that, following what's happening here, there's actually a bill in the Philippines now that is pretty much mimicking what the EU is doing. So maybe in the future more countries will follow that.
Yeah, I have a question. So if I understand you correctly, you're saying that the DMA cannot obligate gatekeepers to let their users people that are in the EU interoperate with users that are not in the EU, even though they use the same service.
Sorry, can you repeat?
As a European user, if I want to interoperate, for example, with WhatsApp, I want to reach out to a user in WhatsApp. Interoperability is required for a user, so my contact that is in the EU, but not for their users in any other country.
Yes, I would say so.
Hi, I'm Matthew Hodgson, project lead for Matrix, the standard for interoperable communication. I had a question about opt-in or opt-out for users. So if I am, say, on WhatsApp, should I automatically be able to be contacted via the wider interoperable sort of DMA network, whatever that is? Or is it acceptable under DMA if, as a user, I have to configure something in order to opt into it?
I don't have the answer, but just to say it's of course one of the options. I mean, that have to be defined for the implementation of the obligation, and I think it's probably something that we will discuss a bit more in panel 3, as I understand it. So probably you will have a better answer there. But it's one of the points that we also mentioned in our report. Of course, you can define it in both ways, and it's a choice to be made by the enforcers.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we have now a question online, then we'll come back to the room. So since this has been mentioned by panelists a few times, this is a question about standardization bodies and that process. So the question is, how can we avoid the standardization of bodies becoming paralyzed by commercial interests and not hampering this process?
Well, again, I would say learning from experience. It's the only thing that, I mean, of course, it would be better to have better rules, and then we promote better rules governing standard-setting organizations. But, I mean, I don't have any solution for that.
I think it's a pretty good question because...
Yeah.
Oh, these microphones. I think it's a pretty good question because we're indeed seeing that some of the international like the multi-stakeholder standardization bodies have had have suffered a lot of influence from industry and others, and so how to keep this truly open is I think a real challenge that goes beyond only this particular article in the DMA. But I think it's possible. But no matter how the setup in those bodies, all of this, the way they work today already, seems to be, to me, more open and more beneficial to the process than any behind closed doors negotiations about APIs between gatekeepers and some competitors.
Again, perhaps something about the rules. I mean, like rules promoting the participation of individuals, not companies. I mean, there are many things that you can really do, and there are already some instances in which it is done.
Okay, we can take one from the room. I think you were first.
Thanks. I'm Alyssa Cooper from Cisco. Chiara, I have a question for you. You were talking at length about the past experience with reference offers and the sort of information gathering that you get from the players in the market over time, and that there's some concern that that process can take a while to really sort itself out to the point where the reference offers are sufficient enough for the challengers to make use of them. I'm curious about your thoughts about the timing with respect to the layout of the obligations in the DMA. So we have, evolving obligations over 2-year periods, the one-to-one messaging coming first and then the group messaging coming 2 years later. And how do you see that interacting? So if we have reference offers that come for the one-to-one messaging obligation first and they're insufficient and you have competitors who can't really actually mount interoperable services because you're having this back and forth about how to make the offers better, and then only 2 years later you're going to run into the group messaging obligation deadline. Like, how do you see the interaction between those things playing out?
Okay, so on the timing, so it was really the willingness of on the timing, so I will not go back maybe on how it is now drafted in the DMA, because it was, as I say, the willingness of the legislator. So it is the timing is what is there. So it could have been different. It could have been maybe better or worse. So we'll not maybe I will not go react on this, but on the reference offer, so it takes time. I'm not sure if it is really exactly true, because it means that the reference offer, in any case, it is in the Article 7.4, that the gatekeepers will have to publish this reference offer. And at the beginning, so what takes time is actually to understand what works. But to understand what works, the best way to reduce this time of this learning is to know what works for access seekers. So I'm not really sure that this would be time consuming, because sometimes there are major issues which can be seen, and then in that case, okay, there is an adapting process which may take the time of the adapting process to change the reference offer and to see what may not work. But sometimes there are a variety of small details that have to be adapted, and for small details, it is actually quite efficient to have just to organize this kind of exchanges with the stakeholders. And then maybe, because I was talking a lot about the asymmetry of information and so on, so just on a more positive note is that what is very good with regulation is that it is a repeated game. So it is not like one shot like you do in competition policy. It is a repeated game. There is an enforcer, there are regulated actors, and it is over time, it continues. So maybe you don't get it exactly right 100% the first time, but that you learn why you did not. So the next time is like some percent more, and over time it always it gets better. So for the reference offer, I think it's really like there is no perfect way to know what is the perfect offer the first time. And the time you will use to adapt it is the time that you will earn and somehow from the having to change the obligation afterwards. So if you do it, if you integrate it actually in the reference offer process, it means that probably you will not need to adapt the obligation afterwards, or that you will not have to find another obligations to solve the issue that you identified in the markets, which would not be solved by a bad reference offer. So all this timing, I think people, when they think about the time-consuming tasks, it should be also concentrated. We should also think of the time-consuming task of getting the obligation wrong, so which takes much longer than taking the time to define it upfront. So.
Thank you, Chiara. That's very encouraging. We still have, just to say, we have time for one more online question, and then we will take 2 more questions in the room. But first, the online one.
Yeah, this is an online question that touches also a little bit upon the reference offers, as you were mentioning reference offer. But this goes to Jan, although if you want to compliment Chiara. So Jan said that there should be a special attention paid to smaller seekers. So in your view, or maybe you can expand a little bit more on what could be reasonable or unreasonable requirements asked for those smaller seekers.
To be totally honest, I don't know. I think because I don't develop apps myself, so I think it would be better to speak to those people directly and ask them what it is that they would need to be in the reference offer, and what kind of burden they're able to carry before they say, oh no, it's not worth it, we can't do it.
Okay. Vittorio Bertola from Open Exchange, I think the biggest European email software vendor for telcos at least. And I think we all agree by now that that usability is key to the success of these, both usability for the operators and even the individual servers that want to interoperate, and usability for the users that have to set up this interoperability thing. So while we now have in the international organization some technical standardization processes going on for the technical part, for what's missing, and I agree maybe there will be the need to check what comes out of that, but that should address at least the technical part. I don't think we have any standardization effort or discussion even on this usability part, so on how should the process look like for users. And I note that the success of interoperability or portability, for example, in mobile services or in internet access services, was also connected to standardizing codes or procedures or certain things. So should we start a discussion on that? What would be the best venue for that? Should the industry, the European industry, and maybe the gatekeepers, if they want to engage, start discussing how the process of interconnecting to users and multiple servers look like, and maybe come to a proposal? Or, I mean, do you have any idea on how the industry could help, and in general how this could work?
Just maybe some reflections on this. So I think, as I was mentioning before, when you have different technical solutions, it will also depend a bit on the critical mass of the industry who agrees around one of those. So for instance, between APIs, provider-specific APIs, or standardization, then you would have, it depends indeed if you have a critical mass of the industry which is agreeing on a kind of standard, common standards, and in that case it is more likely that it would be successful. But in general, how to organize this standardization process, of course, it's one of the main challenges. I'm not sure if any of us would have the perfect answer, but I leave it to the panelists. But I personally don't, unfortunately.
Hi, Antonio Manganelli from University of Rome. Just a framework question about the fact that, of course, interoperability is a way to enhance contestability. So at the end, the aim would be to assist to some inter-platform switching, different from switching in a multi-homing context. So in a way, one aspect of interoperability is to maintain and assure interoperability also in a switching scenario. So there is any lack of flow of interoperability for a user who is switching from one platform to another within the same, let's say, ecosystem of inter-platform interoperating. So the question is there any attention on the switching scenario? So the interoperability and maintaining the interoperability for a user who is switching from one platform to another.
Can you point to some concrete issues there so that we can, so maintaining?
The regulation is not in place. So, I mean, the concrete issue, the fact that there is any lack of interoperability functionalities when you switch from in inter-platform switching. So the point of having interoperability is also to allow some switching, some more switching than in a multi-homing context, right? So you would have someone that at a certain point start interoperating within an ecosystem of one core gatekeeper allowing interoperability, switch to some platform which interoperate with the gatekeeper. So not in a multi-homing context, but in the interoperating context. So it's something that should be maintained, the fact that there is no interoperating flow. So when you switch from one platform to another, it's not clear.
Yeah, maybe you could say a little bit more about. Do you mean like data portability, or like if you say you're a WhatsApp user?
In the switching, you can have data portability. I mean, it's a different remedy, but for sure you could associate that.
Because the switching process itself, it's the same as I mean, in the first place is the same as it is now when you use multi-homing. It's not so much switching per se, but just downloading, let's say, Signal or another messenger, and then starting the process of interoperability with all your contacts that are using WhatsApp. But the question, what happens to my data if I leave, for example, WhatsApp, because that's essentially what we want, is that the gatekeeping service, or the service that has locked in users, so those users have a more diverse choice and might be able to leave. But it's a good question, what happens with all the messages, all the data? Do I have to leave it behind? That's pretty good. I don't have an answer for that.
So I think this is more than just data portability. If I am a WhatsApp user and I want to switch to Matrix or XMPP or some other platform, I will also need to transfer all my contacts. It's not just about the data of my chats, but it's also about the contacts. And we've seen that commercial providers, most recent example Twitter, effectively banned everyone from retrieving their contact lists to ensure that they would stay in. So the question is not just about the data itself, but also who am I talking to? And this, having to build your contact list from scratch when you switch providers is not a good solution. Yeah.
If I may add, but you're rightly saying, if I understand correctly, that this is not a technical problem, right? Technically, that's easy to solve. This is a commercial incentive problem, and then can we make this user-friendly, which I believe we can.
Okay, thank you. If there are no more questions in the...
Maybe I'd like reactions for...
Sorry?
Just to close, reactions from...
Yes. So, okay, we'd rather go if someone wants to say a few closing words, maybe, or...
Not just, I think that it's very nice to think that this is going to be perhaps a kitchen table topic in the EU at some point, the DMA. Just
Okay, otherwise I just wanted to thank everyone. I think we had a very lively discussion. We touched already upon a lot of topics that we will then dive into further in the remaining two panels of the afternoon. I don't know, Rita, if...
Yes, maybe I would also like the panelists to thank the panelists. In a way, they had a heroic job because there were some very difficult questions asked, which I'm not sure that my colleagues and I would be in a position to answer, but they still dared to make a first attempt. So thank you very much for this. And indeed, now we have come to the lunch break, and I'm happy to say that a lunch is served outside of the room. So unfortunately for those who are attending online, we can have our lunch here. And then I would really hope to see you back at 1 o'clock. Yeah.